Good evening. The principle of this message or let me say one of the unique principles of this message concerns the word impersonal or impersonalization. Now, because this is a unique principle, because this is one that is not ordinarily found in religious teachings, it becomes necessary to understand this principle thoroughly and to learn how to apply it in the experiences of daily living. I will start with an illustration. Heretofore, as humans, we have looked first to parents for our good, to employers, to children, to brothers or sisters or friends. For one thing, we look to parents. For something else, we look to children. For something else, we look to brother or sister or friend. But it is a part of natural, normal human living to look outside of ourselves and to look to others for those things which actually we already have embodied within our own being. And the reason we do not know it is that we have thought of ourselves as human beings, finite, limited. We have thought of ourselves as being limited to our education or environment, or limited to our present finances. And because we have so thought of ourselves, we have brought forth the demonstration of limitation. Whereas, if we knew that I and the Father were one, and that the Father has said, "Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine," or if we were to consciously remember that I and my Father are one, not two, just one, and that all that the Father hath is embodied within us as the Son of God, we would then know that that which we call our self is not to be spelt with a small s, but with a capital S. In other words, this that we call Joel would merely be the outward form of myself. But myself is that divine Son of God, which is one with the Father, which has been given God-given dominion over all that is, and to which the Father has given his own allness. Now, once we begin to realize that our self is not a personal, limited self, is not a self limited to our personal sense of good, but rather that our selfhood, our real being, is God, of which that which we call Joel is but the outer form or individual expression. Therefore, Joel is not limited to Joel. Joel has access to his self, spelt capital S-E-L-F. Therefore, when we meditate, when we make contact with our self, our divine self, our spiritual sonship self, our God self, our real self, our infinite self. Therefore, from the moment that we have contact with it, infinity begins to flow forth, and immortality, eternality. Let us think for a moment of a seed. The seed that you're going to plant in your garden. Rose seed, apple seed, any seed. And as you look at that seed, you must agree that it is limited. It is limited to its seed self. Now, what can a seed do or become? And the answer is nothing. A seed by itself will always remain a seed. It will never be more than that. Just a seed. It can become less. It can wither and die and be even less than a seed. But more than a seed it never can be of itself. But planted in the earth, let it be one with its source. Give it access to all that surrounds it, to all that is its real life and being, and your seed evolves and becomes the rose bush with dozens and dozens of roses, or the apple tree with hundreds upon hundreds of apples, all from a seed that of itself was nothing. I of my own self, says the Master, can do nothing. If I speak of myself, I bear witness to a lie. But I and my Father are one, and I can do all things that the Father doeth. I can be all things that the Father is. I am the life. I am the truth. I am the way. I am the bread and the meat and the wine and the water. And just before that he had said, I can of my own self do nothing. But I, through my God self, I, through my God being, I can do and be all things. And so it is then that as the seed is restored to its native element in the soil, all that is in the soil begins to pour forth through the seed and eventually becomes the full-blown product. So with us, this I, which of myself is nothing, The moment I go within to my native soil, which is my inner selfhood, my inner divine being, the moment I go in and become one with the vine, I can bear fruit richly. Everything from the Godhead can now pour forth through me, and I am no longer limited. I am no longer limited to my age or to my bank book or to my education, because now I am drawing up from the depths of my inner being all that is necessary for my experience. But because of our false education, we have accepted Joel as myself and learned never to look within, but rather to look out here, to put my faith in princes, or to put my hope in man whose breath is in his nostril, or in political preference, influence, birth, and so forth. Now, with the revelation of my true being, my true identity, I realize that the self of me is God, or God is the self of me, and therefore I can reach down into this withinness and find myself one with the vine, one with the Christ, one with my divine sonship, one with my divine selfhood. And the moment that contact is established, it is exactly as if a voice said, I am with you, I am going before you, I will become your bread, your meat, your wine, I will appear outwardly as your opportunity, as your companionship, as your home, as your safety, as your security. I will do all things for you. The moment I have made that contact with that divine self, now I no longer look to parents or to children or to neighbors or to friends or to brother or to sister. I look within myself, make contact, and then patient until the flow begins to come from within to the without. And then I find that I do not have to depend on those outside of me, but rather I can share of this infinite storehouse with them until they in their turn learn the infinite nature of their own being and begin to draw on it. In other words, when the Master says, if I go not away, the Comforter will not come to you, he is indicating that we may draw on him until such time as we too have gained the realization that he before us has gained. That is, that I, in the midst of thee, the I in the midst of thee is your wine, your water, your bread, the presence that appears in your experience as divine harmony. Now you see, while you are practicing this, meaning while you turn each day in one of your periods of meditation to the realization that God within me is the self of me. God is my true selfhood, my infinite selfhood. And it is my Father's good pleasure to give me the kingdom. My Father knoweth what things I have need of, even before I speak. Therefore, in this meditation, I need only acknowledge, Father, thou art closer to me than breathing, even in the very midst of me. And because thou art the infinite intelligence of this universe, thou knowest my need, even before I do, even before I could possibly ask. And it is thy good pleasure to give me the kingdom, whatever that may be. It is thy good pleasure to forgive me my sins. It is thy good pleasure to go before me, to make the crooked places straight. It is thy good pleasure to be my constant companionship. It is thy good pleasure to be my bread, my meat, my wine. Thou art my bread, my meat, my wine. Thou art my life eternal. Thou art my resurrection. Thou, Father, in the midst of me, art my infinite supply, my eternal life. And only from the divine fountain in the midst of me will I look for my good to flow. And you see, while you are doing this, you are now dying daily to the belief that someone external to you owes you something, that someone external to you must provide for you, that you are dependent on a person, a group, an employment, an investment, that you are in any wise dependent except upon this infinite self, which is your being. And it becomes easier to you when you think of yourself in terms of capital S instead of small s. Think of yourself as being the Son of God. Think of yourself, always with a capital S, as one with God, heir of God, joint heir to all the heavenly riches. And then you will find that you have impersonalized yourself, because gradually you will come to realize that you are not finite being. You are not man whose breath is in his nostril. You are not that creature who is not under the law of God, neither indeed can be, for you now consciously have the Spirit of God dwelling in you, and according to Scripture, this makes you the Son of God, the child of God. If so be the Spirit of God dwelleth in you, then are you the child of God. The Spirit, the consciousness, if so be the consciousness of the presence of God be in you, then do you become the child of God. No longer mortal, no longer material, no longer finite, no longer dependent on any circumstance or condition external to your own being. Now, dependent only on your conscious union with God, your conscious oneness, by virtue of the fact that yourself is capital S. And from this capital S self, you are now bringing forth your good into expression, or permitting it to flow into expression. Now then, think of what this means when we come to seeing other people. Because remember now, what we have declared of ourselves is true of them. What I have just declared true of Joel, remember now, you have been declaring true of yourself, because if it is true of Joel, it must be true of you, for God is no respecter of persons. God is not a superhuman being that deals in personalities and likes one of us and doesn't like another. God is too pure to behold iniquity. God sees us as his own image and likeness, and therefore anything that is true of Joel must be true of you. Therefore, God is your selfhood, and your selfhood is infinite, and it is from your selfhood that the flow of good begins to appear. Now, this is established in you, and you meditate upon this, you practice this day in and day out in your meditations until, and it will not be too long, you will begin to see this fruitage appear. For remember, you are to bear fruit richly. And you are not to deceive yourself or hide from expecting rich fruitage, but rather you are to consciously remember that because of my identification with God, my Father, the Father within me, my real self, I can now expect that rich fruitage to appear. All right, once this has been established in you, you now have another function. You have to begin secretly, silently, and very sacredly to look around the members of your household, the members of your family, the members of your friends. And remember now what you have thought they were, and begin now to change your concepts of them, so that you realize that all this that you have been declaring of yourself, all this that you now are knowing to be the truth of yourself, is likewise true of them. That they too are one with this divine selfhood. The fact that they at the moment do not know it, this is none of your business. We are not dealing with their demonstration, but your demonstration. And you will not have a demonstration unless you begin to perceive that this truth which you have declared and realized about yourself must be a universal truth. Therefore, regardless of their lack of demonstration, regardless of their lack of willingness to even learn about their identity, you are secretly and silently knowing their true identity. You are doing this in your business, of your employers or your employees, or of your customers or clients. You are knowing this in the classroom, of teachers and of pupils. You are knowing this in the government. It makes no difference what these government people may seem to be or may seem to be doing, you are now realizing their true identity. You are now realizing their oneness with their source. And the reason is not to give them a treatment, just to save yourself from being a malpractitioner. Because unless you are seeing them as they are, you are malpracticing them, and your malpractice comes home to roost. You know, our malpractice of other people never harms them, and their malpractice of us never harms us. Malpractice acts as a boomerang. It goes out from us and eventually hits nothing, because it's only aimed at our concept of somebody, not at somebody, and therefore it turns around and returns and cuts our head off. In one way or another, malpractice is a boomerang. It never strikes those at whom it's aimed. It always turns around and reaches the sender. Now, all malpractice is not malicious. All malpractice is not intended to harm anyone. But unless you are seeing even your enemies, and this is the meaning of pray for your enemies, unless you are seeing everybody as one with God, joint heir, unless you are seeing that self with a capital S is the true identity of everyone, you are malpracticing. You are sort of setting up a new hierarchy. I and my friends are all perfect, and only all the rest of the people aren't. This isn't true. The truth is, we are all one in Christ Jesus. We are all offspring of God. We none of us have human fathers. We have but one Father. The relationship of human father has no relationship to the word Father at all. There is but one Father in this universe, and that is God. And all the rest of us are offspring of that one divine principle. And we are malpracticing when we do not recognize this truth. Now then, we have impersonalized our sense of self as applied to myself, and we have now impersonalized our sense of self as applied to yourself. And we have impersonalized our sense of self as applied to all of the people of this world, including our enemies. Now, just imagine what happens when you sufficiently meditate on this truth, so that you do not recognize any selfhood apart from God. Could you possibly suffer loss or destruction from another if there is no other than God? Can you ever be the victim of injustice, inequality, or any other evil if there is no selfhood than God? This applies very much in our work where we have cases at law, and that is a very frequent occurrence in our practice, that students, patients, friends are brought into court or are caused to be in court in some kind of case. And of course, once you're in court, The biggest word there is justice, because nobody is in court for any other purpose than that of securing justice. And therefore, unless you are seeing God as the selfhood of yourself, of judge, of jury, of attorneys, solicitors, prosecutors, unless you are seeing God as the self, how can you possibly expect justice? Can you expect justice, equity, mercy for a man whose breath is in his nostril? If you do look for it there, you are apt to come out very disappointed in all of your relationships in life, unless you are looking for your good, for justice, for equality, for mercy, for understanding, for cooperation, unless you are looking for it to the divine self of all being, of every individual, you are looking amiss, and you may not find it. So it is that your much meditation on this subject will eventually bring to you the conscious awareness, the actual conviction that God constitutes the selfhood of every individual, and therefore self must be spelt with a capital. And so if you are going to court, or if you are going to employer or to union for justice, be sure that you are expecting it from the divine selfhood of individual being. Be sure that you are recognizing God as that selfhood, and then you will have impersonalized. Now, this is likewise true in our healing work. The first step in our healing work is impersonalization. And this, and you must understand this is a contradiction of all metaphysical practices. The infinite way in its healing work is directly opposite to all other metaphysical teachings. And the reason is this: we do not look within you for the error that is causing your trouble. We do not look to your wrong thinking for the cause. We do not look to the sins for the cause. We do not admit that resentment, jealousy, malice, sensuality, that any of these are causative of your ills. We do not agree that the cause of your illness or your poverty or your sin lies within yourself. We start with self with a capital S, which impersonalizes you and makes God your selfhood, and therefore divine qualities, the only qualities of your being. Therefore, there is no sin in you, nor is there any effect of sin in you, nor is there any disease in you, nor any cause of disease in you, but rather all evil which seems to be manifesting through you is recognized as impersonal, as being no part of you, since God is your being. Even your body is the temple of God. Therefore, this evil cannot be in you or in your soul or in your mind or in your being or in your body. Where is it then? It is in an impersonal belief in mortality, in mortal selfhood, in a sense of separateness from God, which you aren't. You aren't separate from God. You are one with God. Therefore, we can give the commonly known names of devil or carnal mind or mortal mind to this impersonal source of evil. And the moment we have done that, we have separated it from you. The moment that we believe that your wrong thinking or your wrongdoing or your wrong mother or father is responsible for your ills, we have personalized the whole thing, placed it in you, and made it virtually impossible to get it out. Whereas, if in our healing work we recognize God constitutes your being, therefore this evil, regardless of its name or nature, is but this impersonal carnal mind, this universal belief in two powers, this universal belief in a selfhood apart from God. We have impersonalized it, and we have, in more than half the cases, have brought about your healing, and the other half we will bring about if only we will stick to this principle faithfully and persistently until we have overcome the belief within ourselves that there is any you separate and apart from God. Ah, yes, but see what happens. The very moment that you have a grievance against anyone, you have the belief of injustice from them, or lack of mercy or cooperation, you are pinning the evil onto them or into them that we have just removed from you. In other words, your demonstration consists of the ability to impersonalize. And that means that regardless of who it may be that you think is ungrateful to you, unjust to you, immoral to you, neglectful of you, this you must reverse instantly and realize that you have been guilty of malpractice. You have been guilty of seeing God's child as if he were a sinner, God's child as if he were ungrateful, unlawful, unmerciful. And you must begin to realize God as the selfhood of individual being, thereby impersonalizing. Now, there is a wonderful experience of impersonalization in Scripture, in the story of Sapphira and her husband, where after the crucifixion the disciples have banded together, but because of persecution have gone underground. And because they cannot tend to their fishing, they cannot attend to their ways of earning a livelihood while they're being persecuted, they have all agreed to put in together in one fund all that they own, so that all may be supported out of this common fund until this period of persecution may pass. And the story goes that they all did put in all that they had into this common fund in the care of Peter. But Sapphira and her husband decided to hold out a little. And Peter discerned this, and he said to them, "You have not done this unto us. You have done this unto God." In other words, there is no us but God's selfhood. And so it is unto God that you have done this. And we are told that both Sapphira and her husband dropped dead. In other words, the very moment they consciously wronged God, the evil wanged back on them and destroyed them. God didn't do it. The evil that they aimed at this band of disciples really banged up against the selfhood of God, which is invisible, incorporeal. And so there was nothing there and nobody there to receive it. And it had to boomerang right back on the sender. And so the evil that was destined against man was directed to its rightful source, God, and because there was nothing there to aim evil at or hit, it boomeranged and destroyed the sender. Now, we have two things to remember. One is this: it wasn't really Sapphira or her husband that held out. Really and truly, it was this carnal mind operating through them. And since this carnal mind isn't a person and hasn't a person in whom and through whom to operate or upon whom to operate, it becomes a nothingness. When you impersonalize it and first begin to agree, you have not done this unto me, because there is no me separate from God. I have no selfhood but the capital S selfhood. So therefore, you have not wronged me, you have not injured me, you have not aimed this at me, but at God. You will find that you have impersonalized yourself, and any human error that is aimed at you will not strike you. Then, if you will remember also that those who aim evil in your direction, that they're not really aiming it at all. They are merely instruments through which the carnal mind is operating. You will more than likely release them from their sin and bring about their forgiveness. In other words, if you personalize it and say, "You have done this unto me," it may turn around and strike back at them. If it did, it would probably be their fault in the sense of their allowing themselves to be used. But we want to go higher than being avenged. We want to go higher than seeing revenge upon someone. We want to see those who do evil to us forgiven. In other words, released from whatever evil is grasping them. And so the safe way is, if in your experience there is any ingratitude aimed at you, or any lack of mercy or justice, realize first of all your capital S self, and then realize this is really not aimed at me at all. This is aimed at God. And then, by realizing why it isn't even people or person who is aiming it, they are merely the innocent victims, ignorant victims of carnal mind, of ignorance. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And then realize that this carnal mind, since it is devoid of person in whom, on whom, or at whom to operate, you have nullified it, and you'll find how quickly you come into your freedom, a joyous freedom when you are living in a world where no one has anything against you. And if there does seem to be anyone, you've now recognized that it isn't person, it's an impersonal source, which is really not person and not power. Now, you see, this act of impersonalization is a conscious one. It will eventually explain to you why you could sit around from now until doomsday praying to God for something and it wouldn't come. Or you could sit around from now and to the end of time praying for justice or cooperation or gratitude and not get it. In other words, good can only come into your experience through an act of your own consciousness. There is no outside God to see that you get mercy or justice or kindness. I would like to remind you, very sadly, let me assure you, we have a television program in the United States where every week a group of most wonderful, unselfish individuals bring about the release of some man from prison or woman who has been sentenced either to life imprisonment or to the death penalty, who at the time of their sentence were innocent of the crime. And they managed to find not less than 52 of these people in prison every year. And don't you know that they and their relatives were all praying for justice when they were sentenced to life imprisonment or the death penalty, when innocent of the crime? And you say, what good was their prayers? And the answer is none. Because that type of praying is not prayer. It is ignorance. Do you want justice, equality, mercy, kindness from this world? Then you begin in your meditations to impersonalize the evils of this world and begin to know that you are not the source of evil to anyone, because God constitutes the selfhood of your being, and no one else is the avenue or channel of evil toward you, for God constitutes their selfhood, and any evil apparent in your world is a product of a universal thing called carnal mind or mortal mind, which in and of itself is nothing until you give it a person in whom, on whom, or through whom to operate. You see, the responsibility is on your shoulders, because the Master says, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. But he doesn't say the truth will make you free without ye knowing the truth. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. But there's going to be no reaping of good if ye aren't doing the sowing. All of harmony and success in life is up to the individual. And to sow to the Spirit means to impersonalize to the extent that you realize God as the true identity, not only of every human, every animal, every plant. Once you begin to perceive that there is only one life, and that this God is the life of the human, of the animal, of the mineral, of the vegetable, you will find all life flowing joyously to you. And that is the only way that eventually will come about the lamb and the lion lying down together. Once it is perceived that the life, the mind, the soul of the lion is the life and the soul and the spirit of the lamb, for they are one. And in your recognition of this, it will come about. I have witnessed this dozens of times, not with lions and lambs, I must admit, but with cats and dogs who are always chasing birds. It seems to be their nature to chase birds and kill them, sometimes for food and sometimes just for wanton destruction. But I have witnessed over the years dozens, literally dozens, of times when I have been called into homes where there were cats and dogs of that nature, and with just a treatment completely dissolved that bestial nature of the cat and dog and made it possible for them to be friends with the birds. Just through the realization there's only one life, there's only one soul in this universe, there is only one being in this universe. God is the life of all of us, and the life of God doesn't end with a human being. The life of God is infinite. Therefore, the life of God is the life of you and of me, of animals, vegetables, minerals. God constitutes the life of all that lives and breathes. Even the rocks and the stones are living things. They are not inanimate as they appear to be. They are living things. They breathe, and God is the breath of their being. This too, you see, is impersonalizing. It is really making God, the divine self, the self of you and of me and of he and of she and of it. As we meditate on this day in and day out, the truth of this begins to unfold from within ourselves. We gain the conviction of it. I can give to most of you, I might say to all of you, this letter of truth, and to some of you convey even the very spirit or consciousness of it. But for most of you it will be necessary to meditate, ponder this, until something wells up within you and says, this really is truth. This is the truth of being. God does constitute my selfhood. Therefore, my selfhood is not subject to weather or climate or hate or envy or jealousy or wrong thinking. My selfhood is intact in God. My selfhood is intact in its immortality. It is not subject to the beliefs of mankind. It is not subject to the beliefs of mortality. My selfhood does not age. My selfhood does not change. My selfhood is divine, immortal being, God. Ah, yes. But let's be awfully quick. The very moment that we catch the realization that this is true about us, let us immediately turn to every member of our household and then widen that circle until we have taken in the entire world and realized God constitutes individual being. And then you will see there is no selfhood but God. And for this reason, then, We do not pin error onto any individual, not even ourselves. We do not claim that our jealousy, our envy, our greed, our lust is responsible for our ills, because we haven't any such qualities. Any such qualities that may temporarily be expressing themselves through us must be recognized as having their source in the impersonal, carnal, or mortal mind, or devil. And as long as they're out there, they're nothingness. This entire principle of impersonalization is not only one of the most important in our work, but because you do not meet with it in other religious works, you must work doubly hard to embody it in your consciousness, because you will not find it except in this literature, and you will not find it in your experience until you make it your own. You will see why we do not use the name of a patient in our treatments. You will see why we never say you in a treatment, or he or she or it. You will see why we never say to a patient, you must be more loving, or you must be more generous, or you must be more patient. Why we merely present the principles of being. And so it is when giving a treatment. How can I treat you for something when I know there is no you except the God self which is you? Should this leave you with any questions, do not hesitate to write them out and put them on this table tomorrow night. Thank you.